Sometimes life takes a turn when you least expect it. A man at the top of the world, with power, wealth, and influence, thought he had everything figured out. But in a single moment, one glance in an office lobby changed everything. This isn't just about business. It's about love, chance, and the courage to choose happiness over expectations. The lobby of Kingston Enterprises was more than just an entrance. It was a monument to success. The floor gleamed with imported marble, polished so clean you could see your reflection in it. Golden lights draped down from chandeliers like waterfalls, and the walls were lined with framed photographs of Nathaniel Kingston shaking hands with governors, presidents, and titans of industry. Every corner of the space was designed to send a single message: power lived here. For years, Nathaniel had walked through that lobby with the same cold efficiency. He never paused, never looked around, and certainly never noticed the people who passed by in uniforms, wiping glass or buffing floors. To him, the lobby was a corridor, a passageway between his limousine and the elevator that carried him to the top floor. But that morning felt different, even before he saw her. He woke restless in his penthouse, staring out at the Manhattan skyline that stretched endlessly outside his window. The success he once chased with fire had begun to feel heavy, almost meaningless. He moved through his morning routine tailored suit, polished shoes, silent breakfast prepared by staff, but none of it stirred him. By the time he stepped into the car and was driven to headquarters, his mind was already turning over numbers for the board meeting. Margaret, his longtime assistant, was ready with her usual crisp summary of what lay ahead: a presentation on international expansion, new partnership negotiations, and the quarterly review that would decide the mood of the board for weeks. On paper, it was just another day at the top of the corporate ladder. And then he entered the lobby. At first, it was a flicker in the corner of his vision, someone bent low to scrub the marble near the revolving doors. He might have dismissed it like always, except something tugged at him, urging him to look closer. When he did, the air in his lungs seemed to vanish. She looked different than the girl he remembered, of course. Time had passed, but the curve of her cheek, the way her hair curled around her face, even the determined focus in her eyes as she worked, he knew it instantly. Jasmine Walker. His Jasmine. High school memories came rushing back in flashes so vivid it nearly made him stumble. The girl who always sat by the window in English class, chewing on her pen cap while she lost herself in books. The girl who once lent him her notes before a big exam, even though they barely spoke. The girl who smiled at him at prom when his date left with someone else. He had never told her how much she meant to him, how her kindness left a mark on a boy who spent most of his teenage years trying to prove himself. Life had swept them apart. He'd gone to an Ivy League school and straight into the family business, while he realized with a pang, had taken a much harsher road. Jasmine, in a janitor's uniform, bent over a mop bucket. For a man who prided himself on control, Nathaniel's reaction was shocking. His pulse quickened, and the steady stream of thoughts about profit margins and expansion plans crumbled into silence. Margaret's voice was in his ear, reminding him that the board was waiting, but he barely heard her. The meeting suddenly seemed irrelevant compared to the woman scrubbing the floor just a few steps away. "Cancel the meeting," he said firmly, his eyes still locked on Jasmine. Margaret froze. In the years she had worked for him, she had never heard him say those words. Nathaniel Kingston didn't cancel board meetings. "Sir?" she asked cautiously, as though she misheard. "You heard me," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Tell them something came up." Margaret hesitated, glancing between her boss and the woman in the uniform. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew enough not to question him again. She nodded quickly and stepped aside to make the call. Nathaniel's footsteps echoed across the marble as he crossed the lobby. For the first time in years, he wasn't the CEO walking into his kingdom. He was just a man moving toward someone he never thought he'd see again. When Jasmine finally noticed him, she froze. Her hand stilled on the mop, and her eyes widened in disbelief. The bucket beside her rattled slightly, as though it, too, had been startled. "Nathaniel?" she whispered, almost like she wasn't sure if the figure standing before her was real. Hearing his name from her lips was like a jolt through his chest. How long had it been since someone called him that without attaching it to a title, without Mr. Kingston or Sir? Just Nathaniel. He smiled faintly, trying to steady his voice. "It's been a long time, Jasmine." Her brow furrowed. She straightened slowly, setting the mop aside. The years had given her a gravity he didn't remember from their youth. There was strength in the way she held herself, even in a uniform. Her eyes, though weary, still carried the same spark of honesty that had once undone him as a teenager. "You shouldn't be here," she said, glancing nervously toward the elevators where employees were hurrying past. "This isn't your world anymore. You're supposed to be in some important meeting, not talking to." She stopped herself, biting back the words. "Not talking to who?" he asked gently. Her lips pressed into a line. "Not talking to someone like me." The bluntness of her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed the chasm that had opened between them over the years. In her eyes, she wasn't the girl from high school anymore. She was just the cleaning lady, invisible to most, unnoticed by everyone except him. Nathaniel shook his head. "You don't get it, Jasmine. I've been to every meeting, shaken every hand, closed every deal. None of it ever stopped me in my tracks. But you did. Right here. Right now." Her cheeks flushed at his intensity, and she quickly looked away, focusing on the streaks left by her mop. Working, Nathaniel." "I can't stand around talking to you." "Then let me walk with you," he said simply. So he did. As she moved down the lobby, rinsing her mop and wiping down glass panels, he walked beside her, ignoring the curious stares of passing employees. They whispered, no doubt wondering why their billionaire CEO was shadowing a cleaner. But Nathaniel didn't care. He asked her questions as she'd been what she'd done since high school. At first, her answers were clipped, cautious. But the longer he stayed, the more her guard began to slip. She told him about her grandmother, Eleanor, who had raised her after her parents died in a car crash when she was 10. She spoke of working back-to-back jobs, coffee shop by day, cleaning offices by night. She mentioned her classes at night school. Low progress toward a business degree she dreamed of finishing one day. Each fact was delivered matter-of-factly, without complaint. Yet to Nathaniel, every word was a revelation. This woman carried burdens most people in his world couldn't imagine, and still she kept going. When she finished mopping a section of floor, she turned back to him, her expression firm. "You should really get back to your meeting. People depend on you up there." Nathaniel smiled softly. "Maybe, for once, they can wait. Right now, I think I've found something more important." Her eyes lingered on his for a moment, and for just that second, he thought he saw the Jasmine he remembered from high school, the girl whose smile could disarm his entire world. She quickly looked away, shaking her head as if to ground herself back in reality. "You haven't changed," she muttered, half amused, half exasperated. "You have," he admitted quietly. "You've become stronger. And I think that's what I've been missing all these years." For the first time that morning, a small smile tugged at her lips. It wasn't much, but to Nathaniel, it was everything. The boardroom had always been Nathaniel Kingston's arena. It was where he stood tall in front of polished oak tables, surrounded by executives hanging on his every word. But that night, after leaving Jasmine in the lobby, the boardroom felt hollow. He sat through the meeting charts, numbers, projections, but his mind kept drifting back to her. The way her curls brushed her cheeks, the way her voice carried both exhaustion and pride, the way she never flinched when looking him in the eye. By the time the meeting finally ended, it was well past 11. The building was empty, the kind of silence that only skyscrapers knew at midnight. Nathaniel loosened his tie as he walked down the deserted hallways, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. For once, he didn't head straight for the parking garage. Something pulled him back toward the executive wing. He found her there again. Jasmine was bent over a vacuum cleaner, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her posture stiff with the weight of another endless night. The hum of the machine filled the air until she turned and noticed him standing there. She startled slightly, then quickly switched it off. "Mr. Kingston," she said, her voice cautious. "Nathaniel," he corrected gently, offering a small smile. "Just Nathaniel." Her brow furrowed, as if uncertain what game he was playing. "Why are you still here? It's nearly midnight. Shouldn't you be at some gala or dinner with your board members?" "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Why are you still here?" She gestured toward the floors and trash cans. "Because if I don't finish this, I don't get paid. And if I don't get paid, bills don't get paid either." There was no self-pity in her tone, only fact. And that blunt honesty disarmed him more than any corporate negotiation ever could. He found himself stepping into the room, closer to her. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked quietly. "Cleaning?" She shrugged. 3 years. Coffee shop during the day. Here at night? Nights are harder, but they pay a little better. Nathaniel had spent his life in a world where problems were solved with the stroke of a pen, where numbers shifted with a single phone call. Hearing her speak about the grind of survival felt like looking into a world he'd never truly understood. And yet, he couldn't look away. "You shouldn't have to wait for buses at 2 in the morning, he said suddenly, remembering what she'd mentioned earlier. "Let me drive you home." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing across her face. "Why? Because you feel sorry for me?" "No," he said firmly, meeting her gaze. "Because it's not safe, and because I want to." The silence stretched between them. He could see the calculations behind her eyes, weighing trust against caution, pride against practicality. Finally, she gave a reluctant nod. "Fine. But don't expect me to say thank you like you're doing me some big favor." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "I wouldn't dare." That night, they rode together through the quiet streets of Brooklyn. He noticed the way she sat, stiff and upright in his sleek Mercedes, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if afraid to touch anything. Outside the window, Manhattan's glittering skyline faded into dimly lit blocks. Cracked sidewalks and storefronts shuttered for the night. It was another world, one he had rarely seen up close. When he offered to walk her to the door, she shook her head. "That's not necessary." But when he insisted, she sighed and let him. He followed her up the chipped steps of her building, the scent of fried food and cigarette smoke lingering in the hallway. She unlocked her door and turned back to him. "Thank you for the ride, Nathaniel," she said, finally using his name. There was no warmth in her voice, but no ice either, just cautious neutrality. He nodded, fighting the urge to say more, to tell her that seeing her again had shaken something awake inside him. Instead, he stepped back. "Good night, Jasmine." As the door closed between them, Nathaniel felt a pang of something unfamiliar. He had been admired, envied, even desired all his life, but Jasmine hadn't given him any of that. She hadn't fawned over him or treated him like royalty. She looked at him as if he were just a man. And strangely, for the first time in years, that was exactly what he wanted to be. The following nights became a pattern. Nathaniel would stay late, long after the rest of the building emptied. Sometimes he'd pretend to be working, spreading papers across his desk just to justify his presence. Other times, he would simply wander the halls until he heard the hum of her vacuum cleaner or the soft clatter of her mop bucket. At first, Jasmine was wary. "You don't need to follow me around," she warned one evening as she wiped down glass doors. "I'm not following you," he replied with a grin. "I'm keeping you company." Her eyes narrowed, but he noticed the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Slowly, her defenses began to lower. She started answering his questions more openly, telling him about her grandmother Eleanor, the woman who raised her after her parents' car accident. She explained how Eleanor's Parkinson's diagnosis had changed everything, forcing Jasmine to work double shifts to cover the medication and care. Nathaniel listened more intently than he'd listened to anyone in years. He asked about her classes at night school, about the bookstore cafe she dreamed of opening one day. She laughed as she described her idea of filling it with shelves of second-hand books, soft chairs, and live music on weekends. It was the kind of dream born from passion rather than profit, and it captivated him. In return, he told her things he had never admitted aloud. About studying architecture before abandoning it for business when his father fell ill. About how he sometimes envied the people who walked out of his building at 5 o'clock, free to live their lives while he remained shackled to his empire. About how money could buy anything except the one thing he wanted most: something real. Their conversations began to stretch longer each night. One evening, he even picked up a duster from her cart and began awkwardly wiping the shelves in his own office. Jasmine laughed so hard she had to put down her mop. "You're doing it all wrong," she said, stepping close to guide his hand. For a brief moment, their fingers touched, and Nathaniel felt a spark that startled him. It was simple, ordinary even, yet it was more meaningful than any champagne toast at a gala. He realized he looked forward to those moments with her more than anything else in his day. But their growing connection didn't go unnoticed. One morning, Margaret mentioned that the cleaning service had filed a complaint. "They said you were assisting the staff," she explained, clearly baffled. "They're concerned about liability issues." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Tell them there is no liability. If I want to clean my own building, I damn well will. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can speak to me directly." Margaret nodded, but the surprise in her eyes was clear. For years, Nathaniel Kingston had been the kind of man who didn't even notice the cleaning staff. Now he was standing up for them. It was a change no one could ignore. Meanwhile, Jasmine struggled with her own emotions. The attention unsettled her. She had worked so hard to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else. And here was Nathaniel, stepping into her carefully controlled world like a storm. She told herself not to trust it, not to believe in something so impossible. He was Nathaniel Kingston, billionaire CEO. She was a woman who scrubbed his lobby floors. But every night he came back, and every night it became harder for her to convince herself that he wasn't serious. The headline broke before sunrise. It wasn't elegant or fair. It was designed to sting. A blurred telephoto shot Nathaniel in a tux, Jasmine in a simple sweater, the two of them standing close beneath a flickering streetlights at above a line that treated their lives like a spectacle. By 8 a.m., a junior analyst had already forwarded it to his boss, who sent it to a vice president, who slid it into the board chat with a single raised eyebrow emoji. Nathaniel saw it last. He didn't flinch. He read the caption twice, set the phone down, and reached for a legal pad. He began where he knew he had leverage. "Miriam," he said when his PR chief picked up, "draft a statement about workplace dignity and personal privacy. Keep it measured. No grandstanding." She asked if he wanted to deny, deflect, or delay. "None of the above," he said. "We don't hide. We set boundaries." He dictated 3 sentences that were crisp and unambiguous. Company operations were unaffected. Employee safety mattered. And his private life remained private. Then he asked security for a memo tightening lobby access for photographers. No dramatics, just practical steps that told everyone he was in control. The next call was the one that mattered. He asked legal to pull the janitorial contract and page through the indemnity section. "I want an addendum," he said. 2 clauses. First, the company may directly provide safe transit for night shift personnel. Second, executives may assist staff within reason without triggering liability. Write it in clear English. Not the kind of clause you need a magnifying glass to. Read. The general counsel paused, then said, "She'd never seen a CEO ask for plain language provisions." "That's the point," he replied, "so people who work at midnight can actually understand the rules that affect them." By mid-morning, he was in a glass box of a conference room with a speakerphone in the center. The owner of the cleaning firm joined the call, defensive at first. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. When the man finished explaining exposure and policy, Nathaniel responded quietly. "Exposure is a woman waiting 4 hours for a bus in the cold. Policy is what we write to make sure it never happens again." He didn't threaten to pull the contract. He didn't need to. He laid out shuttle coverage, a stipend for late-night meals, and a clear disciplinary ladder that punished harassment, not humanity. To his surprise, the owner exhaled and agreed. Only then did he drive to Greenwich. The Kingston mansion had the kind of symmetry you only get from old money and careful gardeners. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and roses. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper who'd bandaged Nathaniel's skinned knees when he was 7, took his coat and squeezed his hand as if to say, "Be kind, but be firm." He found his mother in the conservatory, the sunlight turning her pearls the color of cream. She poured tea as if nothing in the world was amiss. "Society notices things," Elizabeth began, skipping hello. "It misreads them too," Nathaniel answered, taking the chair across from her. He kept his voice even. He described the shuttle program, the contract language, the statement Miriam would release. He did not ask for permission. He let silence sit between each sentence, the way he'd learned to in negotiations that mattered. Elizabeth's gaze didn't waver, but he saw the calculation behind it, the list of donors she could call, allies she could rally, favors she could trade. "You're gambling our name," she said. "No," he replied. "I'm investing it." He let that land. Then he added something else, not rhetoric, but memory. He talked about the time his father took him to the construction site of their first tower, the day before the ribbon cutting, and pointed to a cement finisher smoothing a seam near the loading bay. "He told me the building was only as good as the hands most people never see," Nathaniel said. "You taught me how to walk into a room like I belonged there. He taught me whose names to learn. Both lessons are useful. I'm choosing to use his today." For a heartbeat, something flickered across her face, something that looked a little like pride and a little like pain. Then it was gone. She set down her cup and changed tactics. People will say she wants what we have. He didn't blink. People say many things when they don't know a person. He rose. I'll send the final statement so you're not surprised, but I won't be seeking approval. Back in the city, the day unfolded like a chess game played on 5 boards at once. PR polished, legal reworded, security posted new signage in the lobby with language that was firm without being hostile. Nathaniel wrote one more document, this one for himself. It was a single-page pledge, where he would draw lines with the press, how he would protect staff from becoming collateral in someone else's narrative, what he would, and would not, say about Jasmine without her consent. He clipped it to the inside of his portfolio, a private compass to glance at when the noise got loud. Across the river, Jasmine's day was a grind of a different kind. She walked into the coffee shop in time to watch the manager avoid her eyes. The conversation was short and clinical. "We need someone more consistent," he said, and she nodded before her voice could break. Outside, she stood in a wind that cut through her coat and scrolled job postings on her phone. Home health aide, front desk clerk, night cashier. She took a picture of the application hours at the community college, 2 afternoons a week, and did the math in her head. Rent, meds, groceries. She ducked into the library to print a stack of resumes, then rode the bus downtown and handed them out with a smile she had to manufacture. That night, back at the building she cleaned, a co-worker from the night crew, a woman named Alma, who kept hand cream in her pocket and peppermint in her bag, noticed Jasmine's quiet and pressed a candy into her palm. "For the ride home," Alma said. No questions asked. Jasmine tucked it into her pocket and kept moving, grateful for kindness that didn't require a story. The first wave of paparazzi hit the sidewalk outside Kingston Enterprises around dusk. Security ushered them behind a barricade without drama. Upstairs, Miriam sent the statement to 3 outlets that had treated the company fairly in the past. No exclusive, Nathaniel told her. Equal footing. He studied the words on the screen one last time. There was no apology for the fact of his heart. There was no lecture either. Just a simple assertion. Every person in the building mattered, and the company would act like it. He texted Jasmine 3 times that day and called once, stopping himself before the second ring so he wouldn't become one more thing she had to manage. When she didn't answer, he didn't spiral. He pulled his pledge from his portfolio, read it like a prayer, and kept working the plan. By evening, another call came in from Vanessa. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mum's furious," she said. "Good," he replied. "It means she's thinking." Vanessa sighed. "And you?" He pictured Jasmine at a kitchen table filling out forms under a cheap lamp. "I'm fine," he said. It wasn't true, but it was simple. "What can I do?" Vanessa asked. And there it was, the shift. He could hear it. He told her about a literacy pilot he'd been funding in 3 neighborhoods with no bookstores and under-resourced schools. If it had the right leader, he said, it could become more than a pilot. Vanessa didn't ask who he had in mind. She had already seen the photos others had twisted into a narrative and spotted what they'd missed, the way her brother was looking at someone because he finally felt seen. She didn't tell him she planned to knock on Jasmine's door the next day. She didn't promise she would be kind, but she intended to be fair. That night, Nathaniel drove to Brooklyn because there are some conversations that do not belong on speakerphones. He told Jasmine everything that would affect her life before she read it online. He didn't sugarcoat. He didn't promise fixes he couldn't guarantee. He asked for nothing in return except time. Eleanor listened from the doorway, hands folded in her lap, eyes sharper than either of them realized. When he left, she wheeled herself to the table and rested her hand over her granddaughter's. "Sometimes storms tell you which windows aren't sealed," she said. "This one is telling you which men don't leak." Jasmine didn't sleep much. She wrote pro and con lists on an envelope, then crossed the lists out and wrote a single sentence she hadn't been ready to say. "Do I trust him to keep showing up when it costs him?" She capped her pen and stared at the ceiling until the radiator clicked. By morning, the gossip sites had moved on to a celebrity breakup. The cameras at the barricade stayed anyway. The people who mattered, the receptionist who brought extra cups to the night shift, the guard at the back door who learned first names, the woman in accounts payable who quietly set aside a used monitor for a custodial worker's, Kid took their cues from the statement and returned to the business of being decent. In the middle of it all, the elevator opened and a woman in a dark sweater stepped out, chin up. Security called upstairs. Nathaniel took the call himself. "Send her up," he said. And then he stood and smoothed his tie like a man about to do something brave in a room that knew him too well. He didn't rehearse what he would say. He had already done enough talking. It was time to listen. When the doors parted and Jasmine stepped into his office, the city spread behind him like a field of glass. He didn't move. He let her set the pace. She crossed the carpet with quiet steps, stopped an arm's length away, and looked him in the eye. "Your sister came by," she said, voice steady. She didn't come to threaten or to flatter. She came to offer work that means something. He nodded once. "Vanessa is direct," he said. "She gets that from our father." Jasmine didn't sit. Her posture had the kind of dignity that comes from weathering storms without an umbrella. "I still don't know where this ends," she admitted. "I don't know how to live with cameras outside places I can barely afford to eat. I don't know how to visit my grandmother's doctor without someone making a story out of her wheelchair. I don't know how to stop strangers from dragging my name through places I have never been." She let the words hang there, not a complaint, simply a list of realities. "I don't know either," he said, and she blinked, surprised by the honesty. "But I know 3 things. I can make the building safe. I can keep the company humane. And I can ask for grace in the spaces between those 2. The rest we figure out as we go." He didn't reach for her. He didn't make the moment theatrical. He waited. What she did next wasn't dramatic. She breathed in, breathed out, and nodded. The smallest movement, and yet it shifted both of their lives. "Then we don't do the movie version," she said. "No red carpets, no declarations on talk shows, no staged anything. We go to work. We go home. We protect the people we love. If anyone asks, we answer what's kind and decline what isn't." He smiled, relief softening the angles of his face. "Agreed," he said. "And if we mess up because we will, we fix it out loud." They sat at the small round table by the window, the one he almost never used for anything, and outlined something that looked like a plan. They would keep their relationship out of internal emails and off official channels. He would not appear at her workplace, and she would not be asked to appear at his events. When a journalist called her phone asking for comment, she would direct them to PR. When a board member made a snide remark about optics, he would answer it in the room, not with an eye roll in the hallway after. They would tell Eleanor everything first. They would tell no one who needed secrets to feel important.